I wiped down the counter at Hanson's Diner for what felt like the 100th time that evening. Tuesday nights were always slow, especially in October when the chill started creeping in and most folks stayed home. Only 3 tables were occupied, the Johnsons having their weekly dinner date, old Mr. Finley nursing his coffee and pie, and a couple of teenagers sharing a basket of fries in the corner booth. The bell above the door jingled, and I looked up to see a man I'd never seen before. In a town of 800 people, strangers stuck out immediately. He was tall with dark hair and carried himself with the confidence of someone used to walking into unfamiliar places. A camera hung around his neck. Not a tourist's point and shoot, but a professional-looking setup with an expensive lens. He settled at the counter, setting down a leather messenger bag stuffed with notebooks and what looked like recording equipment. "Coffee, please," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "And whatever you recommend for dinner." "House burger and fries is what most people go for," I said, pouring his coffee. "I'm Emily. Welcome to Pine Harbor." "David Peterson," he replied, extending his hand. His grip was firm, businesslike. "Freelance journalist. I'm working on a piece about rural folklore and unexplained disappearances in small Michigan towns." My hand froze on the coffee pot. A cold feeling crept up my spine that had nothing to do with the draft from the old windows. "Unexplained disappearances?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. David nodded eagerly, pulling out a notebook. "This whole region has fascinating stories. People vanishing in the woods, strange lights, unexplained deaths." He leaned forward. "I've been tracking similar patterns across 3 counties, but your town has the highest concentration of incidents per capita. I'm hoping to get some local perspectives." I turned away to put in his food order with Hank in the kitchen, using those few seconds to compose myself. When I returned, David had a small recorder on the counter. "Do you mind?" he asked, gesturing to the device. "Just for my notes." "I'd rather not," I said, sliding a glass of water toward him. "We don't have much to tell about those kinds of stories." "But you know them," he pressed, his eyes lighting up. "The legends, the warnings. Someone in the next town over mentioned Pine Harbor has actual rules about the woods. Said people here won't even talk about what's out there." He flipped through his notebook. "Something about not looking directly at certain animals, not going out after dark." The Johnsons at table 3 were paying their bill now. Mr. Finley stared into his coffee cup. The teenagers had gone quiet in their booth. In the small space, everyone could hear our conversation. "Those are just old stories," I said, loud enough for the regulars to hear me giving the standard response to outsiders. Then, lowering my voice, I added, "Maybe we can talk about something else." But David Peterson wasn't taking the hint. "I'm planning to camp near the woods tonight," he announced, pulling out a map and spreading it on the counter. "Right about here. Should give me authentic footage for the article, maybe catch some night sounds or local wildlife. I've got motion-activated cameras too." I felt sick. The spot he'd marked was less than 100 yards from where they'd found my grandfather's body 12 years ago, close to where Cousin Mark had vanished 4 summers back. "That's private property," I lied. "You can't camp there." David raised an eyebrow. "The county land records show it's public forest land." I checked. Mr. Finley coughed loudly and shuffled out, leaving a 20 under his coffee cup for a $7 meal. The teenagers hurried after him, avoiding eye contact. The Johnsons lingered by the door, Nancy Johnson giving me a concerned look before her husband guided her outside. I was alone with David now. "Look," I said, leaning on the counter. "Our town has rules about the woods, important ones. They might sound like superstition to you, but they keep people safe." "Rules." David's eyes lit up. He clicked on his recorder despite my earlier request. "Like what, exactly?" I should have kept my mouth shut, should have given him his burger and sent him on his way. But I couldn't stand the thought of another person venturing into those woods unaware, unprepared. Not if I could prevent it. There are 5 critical rules, I said quietly. First, never enter the woods after sunset or before sunrise. Second, if you hear someone calling your name from the trees, ignore it completely. Don't answer. Don't look. Third, if you see a white deer, don't look directly at it or follow it under any circumstances. Fourth, don't take anything from the woods. Not a flower, not a stone, nothing. And fifth, if you feel watched or hear whispers, leave immediately, walking backward until you reach the road. David's smile widened as he took notes. This is gold, absolutely perfect for my piece. I'm not telling you this for your article, I said sharply. I'm telling you because people who break these rules get hurt, or worse. What happens if someone breaks them? He asked. The kitchen bell dinged. I retrieved his burger, buying time to decide how much to share. My grandfather went mushroom hunting 12 years ago, I said, setting the plate in front of him. He stayed too late, broke the first rule. We found him the next morning at the edge of the trees. The medical examiner said heart attack, but I paused, remembering his face. His eyes were wide open. His mouth was stretched, like he'd seen something that terrified him to death. David took a bite of his burger, chewing thoughtfully. Stress-induced cardiac event, not uncommon in elderly people experiencing fear. He was 58 and ran 5 miles every morning, I countered. 4 years ago, my cousin Mark went in on a dare at night. He took a flashlight and his phone to record himself breaking all 5 rules. We never found his body. Just his phone with 10 minutes of footage showing nothing but trees, then static. David was typing notes into his phone now, his food half forgotten. Memory corruption is common in electronic devices exposed to extreme temperatures or moisture, and people get lost in woods all the time. Not these woods, I insisted. They're only 8 square miles. We had search parties for weeks. Dogs, helicopters with thermal imaging. Nothing. Which makes it even more interesting to investigate, David said, his voice rising with excitement. Don't you want to know what really happened to your family members? What if there's a rational explanation that's been overlooked? There isn't. Every unexplained phenomenon has a logical cause. Hallucinations from wild mushrooms, gas pockets causing disorientation, infrasound from wind patterns causing anxiety and paranoia. He counted theories on his fingers. Even animals behaving strangely due to environmental factors. I watched him eat. This stranger who thought he understood our woods after reading some articles and county records, who thought our generations of knowledge were just stories to debunk for his readers. In fact, he continued between bites, I'm planning to document myself breaking each rule systematically. Controlled experiments to show what actually happens. My stomach dropped. You can't be serious. Completely serious. That's authentic journalism, experiencing it firsthand. I'll start by entering at sunset with cameras rolling. Call out to any voices I hear, approach any wildlife I see. I might even collect some specimens. He smiled. By demonstrating nothing happens when the rules are broken, I can explore the psychological and sociological reasons why these beliefs persist. I'd seen this before. The confident outsider, certain they knew better than locals. Usually they left with nothing worse than embarrassment when their rational explanations fell apart. But not if they deliberately broke all 5 rules. Not if they went looking for what lived among the trees. Let me offer you a room at my family's bed and breakfast, I said. It's just off Main Street, clean, comfortable, and you can interview more locals tomorrow. Better material than camping alone. Thanks, but I need to camp for the authentic experience, David said, pushing his empty plate away. The article's angle is Night in the Haunted Woods, facing fears, exploring the psychology of local legends firsthand. The wall clock showed 8:50, 10 minutes until closing. At least take my number, I said, scribbling it on his receipt. If you change your mind or need anything. David tucked the paper into his pocket with a patronizing smile. I appreciate your concern, but I'll be fine. These stories, they serve a purpose. They keep children from wandering too far, maintain community cohesion through shared beliefs, preserve private hunting grounds by scaring off outsiders. I've seen it all before. He paid his bill, leaving a decent tip, and packed up his equipment. I walked him to the door, making one last attempt. The rules exist for a reason, I said. People who ignore them miss out on understanding the truth behind the legends, he finished for me. Don't worry, Emily. I promise my article will treat your town's traditions with respect, even while exploring the factual basis behind them. I watched him load his gear into a silver SUV with rental plates. The sun was already setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. In less than an hour, it would be fully dark. Be careful, I called as he climbed into the driver's seat. Please. David waved cheerfully and pulled away, turning toward the woods road. I stood in the doorway until his taillights disappeared around the bend. A heavy feeling settled in my chest. Guilt mixed with helplessness. I couldn't force him to stay away, couldn't make him believe. But I knew what waited in those woods after dark, and I knew I wouldn't sleep tonight. I closed up Hanson's Diner at 9 on the dot, my mind stuck on David Peterson and his foolish plan to camp in the woods. The thought of him deliberately breaking the rules made my stomach twist into knots. Most visitors were skeptical about our warnings, but they usually stayed away from the woods after dark. They didn't go looking for trouble. After locking up, I drove home to my small rental on Maple Street, a white farmhouse-style cottage that had belonged to my grandmother before she passed. I tried calling David's number that I'd glimpsed on his receipt, but it went straight to voicemail. The mechanical voice told me the mailbox was full. David, it's Emily from the diner, I said after the tone. Please call me back. Don't stay in those woods tonight. I knew my message would likely go unheard. The cell reception near the forest edge was spotty at best, non-existent at worst. That's what we told ourselves, anyway. The truth was that phones often stopped working altogether once the sun went down. I took a shower and got ready for bed, going through the motions while my mind raced. The bedside clock read 11:30 when I finally slid under the covers, but sleep wouldn't come. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about David's confident smile, his casual dismissal of generations of warnings. What if I'd been more forceful? What if I'd followed him? Maybe I could have convinced him to stay at the bed and breakfast instead. Or called Robert, our sheriff, to run him out of town on some trumped-up trespassing charge. But I'd done none of those things. I'd let him drive away with nothing but a written phone number and a half-hearted warning. At 1 a.m, I gave up pretending I might sleep. I paced the bedroom floor, checking my phone every few minutes for missed calls or messages. Nothing. The house creaked and settled around me, familiar sounds that usually brought comfort. Tonight, they felt like warnings. I made tea, stared at the television without really seeing it, and checked the clock again. 2:17 in the morning. I considered driving out to the campsite, but immediately dismissed the idea. Breaking the first rule to save someone from breaking the rules wouldn't help either of us. The roads near the forest weren't safe after dark, even inside a vehicle. The stories my grandmother told me as a child came flooding back. Drivers who saw strange lights and followed them off the road, never to return. People who thought they saw a loved one standing among the trees and stopped to help them. No, I needed to wait for dawn. The longest hours of my life stretched ahead. At 3, I heard it. My name, whispered softly from outside my window. Emily. I froze in my living room, teacup halfway to my lips. Emily, come see. The voice was familiar and yet wrong somehow, like someone trying to mimic a voice they'd only heard once. I set my cup down carefully and moved away from the windows. Emily, we found something beautiful in the trees. I pulled all the curtains tighter, making sure no gaps remained. Rule number 2, if you hear someone calling your name from the trees, ignore it completely. don't you want to know what happened to Mark? He's here with us." My cousin's name in that voice made me clench my fists so hard my nails cut into my palms. I turned on the radio to drown out the whispers, settling on an old classic rock station playing songs my grandfather used to love. The whispers continued intermittently for almost an hour before falling silent. I knew what it meant. David's presence in the woods had stirred things up, broken the fragile balance that kept our town safe. The whispers rarely came this close to town, rarely called to those who followed the rules. I didn't turn off the radio until 5:30. When I finally did, the silence felt heavy with expectation. At the first hint of dawn, 6:02 according to my phone, I grabbed my keys and headed for my truck. The sky was just beginning to lighten, painting the clouds in shades of pink and gold. Morning was the safest time to approach the woods, old wisdom said. Whatever lurked there retreated deepest as the sun rose. I followed the same road David had taken the previous evening, turning onto the narrow dirt path that led to the public forest land. His silver rental SUV was parked where the trail began, untouched as far as I could tell. I pulled in behind it and shut off my engine. The campsite wasn't hard to find. About 100 yards from the parking area, just within sight of the deeper woods, but not past the invisible boundary locals knew to observe. David had pitched a small dome tent in a clearing and set up what looked like an elaborate camera system on tripods around the perimeter. The tent flap was open, sleeping bag empty inside. "David," I called, my voice sounding too loud in the morning stillness. Birds chirped overhead, a normal sound that somehow made everything else feel more wrong. His equipment lay scattered, some cameras knocked over, a notebook open on a camp table with half-finished notes. His fancy digital recorder sat beside it, the red recording light still blinking. I picked it up carefully and pressed play. "This is David Peterson, reporting from the supposedly haunted woods of Pine Harbor, Michigan." His voice came through clearly, confident and slightly mocking. "It's now 9:45 p.m., and I'm about to begin systematically testing the 5 rules the locals insist will protect me from." He chuckled. "Well, whatever they think lives in these woods." A pause, then the sound of movement. Rule number 1 states never enter the woods after sunset. As you can see, well, here, since it's just audio now, I'm walking into the tree line at night. Temperature is dropping slightly, but nothing unusual for October in Michigan. More footsteps, leaves crunching. I've set up motion-activated cameras throughout this area. If anything moves out here tonight, I'll catch it. Now for rule number 2. According to local lore, if I hear someone calling my name, I should ignore it. He raised his voice. "Hello? Anyone out there want to call my name?" Silence on the recording. Then David's laugh. Not surprisingly, the trees aren't talking back. Moving on to... Then, so faint I nearly missed it, a whisper. "David." He didn't seem to notice. Rule number 3 warns against looking directly at white deer. I haven't seen any wildlife yet, but it's early. Typical white-tailed deer are active at dawn and dusk, so... "David." The whisper came again, louder. This time he paused. "Hello? Is someone there?" "David, come see who's there." His voice had lost some of its confidence. "This is private property. I have permission to be here." A lie, I knew. He had no permission beyond the public access laws. "David, look at us." "Who's us?" "Show yourselves." Footsteps again, faster now. If this is some local trying to scare off the outsider, it won't work. I'm a journalist. I don't frighten easily. A sound came through the speaker then. Not quite laughter, not quite whispers, but something in between that made my skin crawl. "Fascinating," David said, his journalistic detachment returning. "Some kind of audio phenomenon. Could be wind through the trees, creating sounds that mimic human speech patterns. I've documented similar effects in caves with unusual acoustic properties. The recording continued with him moving deeper, theorizing about infrasound and auditory hallucinations triggered by suggestion. Then came a sharp intake of breath. There's something... I see movement between the trees. Approximately 30 yards ahead. Could be a deer. The coloring appears... yes, it's white. Fascinating. I'm going to approach slowly and get footage. No, I thought. That's rule number 3. Don't look at the white deer. It's just standing there. Beautiful specimen. Unusually pale, almost luminescent in the moonlight. I don't think it's an albino. The eyes aren't red. I can't quite make out the color from here. His breathing quickened. I'm moving closer. It doesn't seem afraid. In fact, it almost appears to be watching me, waiting for me. More footsteps, then silence. Oh. Just that single word, spoken in a tone of wonder and revelation. Oh, I see now. It's not... I understand. The recording cut to static, a harsh white noise that made me jump. I hit stop, my hands shaking. I checked his phone next, found on the ground near the tent. Several missed calls from someone labeled editor, and one text message asking about progress on the article. No outgoing calls since yesterday afternoon. I needed to find David. If he had broken the rules and survived the night, he might still be nearby. I walked toward the tree line, stopping well short of where the real forest began. From this distance, I could see the boundary that locals recognized, where the ordinary Michigan woods transformed into something older and wrong. The light seemed different there, the shadows deeper, the spaces between trees somehow not quite the right size. That's when I spotted him. David sat with his back against a tree at the very edge of the forest. He wasn't moving, just staring straight ahead into the deeper woods. His camera lay broken on the ground beside him. "David?" I called, approaching cautiously. "David, it's Emily from the diner." He didn't respond, didn't even blink. I moved closer, waving a hand in front of his face. His eyes were open but unfocused, the pupils dilated despite the morning light. "David, can you hear me?" Finally, he turned toward me. The movement was too smooth, too deliberate, like someone operating a machine they weren't familiar with. When he smiled, something was fundamentally wrong with the expression. Too wide. Muscles stretched in ways they weren't meant to stretch. "Emily," he said, his voice flat and slightly distorted. "Why are you worried about someone who didn't respect the rules?" A chill ran through me. The words were formed with David's voice, but the cadence was all wrong, like someone else speaking through him. "I'm here to help you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to get you back to town." "Why?" he asked, that terrible smile still fixed on his face. "I need to go back. They're waiting for me." "Who's waiting, David?" He looked back toward the deeper woods, his expression shifting to one of longing. "The pale ones. They showed me the truth. About the rules. About everything." He reached out, pointing. "They're so beautiful, Emily. You should see them." I didn't look where he pointed. Instead, I grabbed his arm and tried to pull him to his feet. "We need to go now, David. Right now." His skin felt cold under my fingers despite the flannel shirt he wore. When he finally stood, his movements were jerky, uncoordinated, like he was operating his limbs from memory rather than instinct. "I need to finish my investigation," he said, pulling against my grip and taking a step toward the trees. "I need to go deeper. They're waiting to show me more." "Your investigation is over," I said firmly, tugging him toward the parking area. "You need medical attention." David laughed then, a sound that had nothing to do with humor. "Medical attention won't help me see the truth. Only they can show me that." I managed to turn him away from the trees, but he kept looking back over his shoulder, that unnatural smile returning whenever his gaze drifted toward the forest. His feet dragged and stumbled on the uneven ground as I pulled him along. "The woods are calling me home, Emily," he said in that wrong voice. "Don't you hear them? They're calling your name too." I tightened my grip on his arm. "We're going to my truck, now." "They told me about your cousin," David said suddenly. "Mark went deeper than anyone else. He saw everything. Don't you want to know what happened to him?" I refused to engage with whatever was speaking through David. Instead, I focused on the practical task of getting him to my truck, one foot in front of the other. Don't look back at the trees. Don't listen to the whispers that might be the wind or might be something else. David's resistance grew stronger as we got farther from the woods. He twisted in my grip, his eyes fixed on the forest behind us. "I need to go back," he insisted, his voice rising with desperation. "They're not finished with me. My story isn't complete." "Your story is over," I said, finally reaching my truck and yanking open the passenger door. "Get in." He tried to pull away, but I maintained my grip on his arm. Whatever had happened to him in those woods had affected his mind, but not his physical strength. I managed to maneuver him toward the open door, but he braced his free hand against the frame, refusing to enter. "The pale ones don't like metal," he said, his face contorting with what looked like genuine fear. "They can't follow where metal goes." That, at least, aligned with the old stories, iron and silver, the traditional wards against the forest dwellers. My truck, with its steel frame, would provide some protection if I could just get him inside. "David," I said, looking directly into his eyes, "you need to get in the truck now." Something flickered behind his eyes, a moment of clarity perhaps, or the real David fighting to surface. His resistance wavered, and I seized the opportunity to push him into the passenger seat. He sat rigidly, hands gripping his knees, that unnatural smile gone now as he stared straight ahead. I slammed his door and hurried around to the driver's side, half expecting him to bolt. But when I got in, he remained motionless, though his breathing had accelerated. "They're angry," he whispered as I started the engine. "They wanted me to stay, to become like them." I threw the truck into reverse, backing away from the campsite and David's abandoned equipment. We'd need to send someone to retrieve it later, someone who knew the rules and had the proper protections. As we pulled away, David pressed his face against the passenger window, staring at the tree line with naked longing. I kept my eyes on the dirt road ahead, focusing on getting us back to town where Robert Mitchell would know what to do. David had looked at something in those woods during the night, something that wasn't supposed to be seen, and whatever had looked back at him hadn't finished its work yet. I gripped the steering wheel of my truck so tightly my knuckles turned white as I drove away from the woods. David sat unnaturally still beside me, his head twisted toward the passenger window, eyes fixed on the trees growing smaller behind us. The morning light should have felt reassuring, but the air inside the cab felt wrong, too cold, too heavy. "They're watching us leave," David whispered, his breath fogging the glass. "They don't like it when someone takes what belongs to them." I kept my eyes on the dirt road, forcing myself to concentrate on the ruts and potholes rather than his words. "You don't belong to anything in those woods, David." He turned to me then, moving his entire upper body in one fluid, unnatural motion. That terrible smile stretched across his face again. "I saw them, Emily. The pale ones, so beautiful, so patient." His voice had that wrong cadence, like someone trying to mimic normal speech without understanding how it worked. "They've been waiting for so long." "Stop talking," I said, pressing harder on the gas pedal as we hit the paved road into town. "Just stop." David laughed, a hollow sound that didn't match the movement of his face. "They showed me what happened to your cousin, what happened to all the others who came too close. They showed me what will happen to everyone in Pine Harbor eventually." I switched on the radio, turning the volume up to drown him out. An old Bruce Springsteen song filled the cab, but David kept talking, his words just audible beneath the music. The rules don't protect you. They just delay the inevitable. His hand shot out suddenly, gripping my arm with ice-cold fingers. You should have let me stay. They're angry now. They'll come looking. I yanked my arm away. We'll be in town in 5 minutes. Robert will know what to do. David's smile widened at the mention of the sheriff's name. Robert Mitchell, the protector, the one with the silver bullets. He pressed his face against the window again. Do you think Silver will stop what's coming now? The 10-minute drive to town felt like hours. By the time I pulled up in front of the sheriff's office on Main Street, David had cycled between eerie stillness, manic rambling about the Pale Ones, and periods of struggling against his seatbelt, trying to open the door and return to the woods. I parked directly in front of the building's steps and cut the engine. Wait here, I told him, knowing it was pointless. Whatever was left of David Peterson wouldn't follow instructions. I ran inside, finding Robert at his desk reviewing paperwork. He looked up, immediately alert at my expression. What's happened? He asked, already standing and reaching for his jacket. David Peterson, the journalist I told you about yesterday. The words tumbled out in a rush. He camped in the woods last night, broke the rules. All of them, I think. I found him this morning and he's wrong. Robert's weathered face turned grim. He pulled open his desk drawer and removed his service weapon, checking it before holstering it. Then he reached deeper into the drawer and pulled out something else, a small leather pouch that I knew contained blessed silver bullets. Where is he? Robert asked, his voice calm but urgent. In my truck, right outside. We hurried out, but my stomach dropped when I saw the empty passenger seat. The door hung open and David was nowhere in sight. Damn it, I muttered, scanning the street. There, Robert pointed. David stood in the middle of Main Street, face tilted up toward the morning sun, that terrible smile still fixed on his face. As we approached, he slowly lowered his head to look at us. Sheriff Mitchell, he said, his voice carrying unnaturally in the quiet morning air. The man with the silver, the one who keeps the town safe. Robert stepped forward cautiously. Mr. Peterson, I need you to come inside with us now. David cocked his head at an uncomfortable angle. They told me about you, about what you did 10 years ago when the hunters went too deep. He stepped closer, moving with that same wrong fluidity. Did you really think those men were lost? That their bodies were never found because of wolves? Robert's face remained impassive, but I saw his hand move subtly toward his holster. Emily, get on the other side of him. I circled wide, positioning myself behind David while Robert kept his attention. The few early morning shoppers and workers along Main Street quickly crossed to the other side, giving us a wide berth. Pine Harbor residents knew when something wasn't right. Let's get inside, Robert said to David, gesturing toward the sheriff's office. We can talk there. To my surprise, David nodded and allowed us to guide him into the building. Once inside, Robert locked the door and pulled the blinds shut. Sit down, Mr. Peterson, he said, pointing to a chair in the corner of his office. David sat with that same mechanical precision, hands placed perfectly parallel on his knees, back straight, head tilted slightly as if listening to something we couldn't hear. Up close in the office lighting, I could see his skin had taken on a grayish tinge, and his eyes held an emptiness that made my skin crawl. Robert turned to me. Tell me exactly what happened. I quickly explained finding David at his campsite, the recording, and his bizarre behavior on the drive back. Robert listened without interruption, his expression growing darker. When I finished, he picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. Nancy, it's Robert. Call an emergency town meeting. Community Center, 10 o'clock. He paused, listening. Yes, it's about the woods. Tell everyone it's mandatory. He hung up and looked at David, who sat motionless except for his eyes, which tracked Robert's movements with predatory focus. What did you see in those woods last night? Robert asked him directly. David's smile widened. Truth? Beauty? The pale ones who have always been here, they showed me what lives between the trees, what waits for all of you. And what is that exactly? Robert pressed. David leaned forward slightly. The end of your rules, the end of your town. His voice dropped to a whisper. They're hungry after waiting so long. Robert's jaw tightened. He turned to me. We need to secure him somewhere safe until we figure this out. The cell and back will work for now. Together, we managed to move David to the small holding cell behind the office. He didn't resist physically, but he kept talking in that wrong voice the entire time, describing the pale ones and how beautiful they were when they showed their true forms. You'll see them soon, he told us as Robert locked the cell door. Everyone will see them. You can't hide behind your rules anymore. We left him there, still smiling, still watching us with empty eyes. Back in the main office, Robert pulled out a dog-eared ledger from a locked cabinet. I recognized it immediately. The town record, where incidents involving the woods were documented going back generations. How bad is it? I asked quietly. Robert flipped through pages of cramped handwriting. Bad. We haven't had someone break all 5 rules deliberately in decades, not since your cousin. This is my fault, I said, the guilt I'd been suppressing rushing to the surface. I should have stopped him, called you last night when he first mentioned camping there. Robert shook his head. You tried to warn him. Some people can't be warned. He looked up from the ledger. But you're right that we have a serious situation now. Whatever he encountered out there has been disturbed. Awakened, maybe. What do? We warn everyone. Reinforce the protections, and we keep a close eye on the woods for the next few days. He closed the ledger. For now, I need you to help me prepare for the meeting. People will have questions. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of phone calls and preparations. Robert contacted key community members. The mayor, Dr. Harrison from the clinic, Pastor Williams, and the elders who knew the old ways best. I helped gather the protective supplies we might need, bags of salt, iron nails, blessed silver items, and copies of the protection rituals my grandmother had passed down to me. By 9:45, the community center was filling with concerned residents. People spoke in hushed tones, eyes darting nervously toward the windows. They knew an emergency meeting meant trouble from the woods. Robert stood at the front of the room beside Mayor Thompson. I sat in the front row, the weight of responsibility heavy on my shoulders. If I'd been more forceful with David, perhaps none of this would be happening. At precisely 10 o'clock, Robert called the meeting to order. The room fell silent immediately. I know you're all wondering why we've called you here, he began, his deep voice carrying easily through the space. Last night, a visitor to our town deliberately broke all 5 rules in the woods. A collective gasp went through the room, followed by murmurs of alarm. The visitor's name is David Peterson, a journalist writing a story about local legends. He's currently in custody, but he's... Robert paused, searching for the right words. He's been affected by what he encountered. I watched the faces of my neighbors and friends as Robert explained the situation. Fear, yes, but also resignation. The look of people who had lived with this threat for generations and knew exactly what it meant. The immediate concern is containment, Robert continued. We need to reinforce the standard protections around all homes and businesses. Salt lines at doors and windows, iron nails above entryways, the usual precautions, but doubled. Mayor Thompson stepped forward. School will be canceled for the rest of the week. No one under 18 leaves home without an adult. No one, and I mean no one, goes near the woods until further notice. As they outlined the emergency procedures, a commotion from the back of the room caught my attention. David, who should have been secured in the sheriff's cell, stood swaying in the doorway. His eyes were completely black now, his smile stretched impossibly wide. Before anyone could react, he began screaming, a high, inhuman sound that made everyone cover their ears. Robert moved with surprising speed, rushing toward David as he collapsed to the floor, his body convulsing violently. Foam flecked his lips, and his limbs twisted at impossible angles. "Get back!" Robert shouted to the crowd as they pushed away from David's thrashing form. "Dr. Harrison!" The doctor rushed forward with Robert, both kneeling beside David as his body arched off the floor. The screaming had stopped, replaced by a series of clicking sounds that seemed to come from deep in his throat. "How did he get out of the cell?" I asked as I joined them. "He didn't," came a voice from the doorway. Deputy Clark stood there, keys in hand. "I just checked. The cell is still locked, empty, but locked." A chill ran through me. That wasn't possible. David's body gave one final violent spasm, then went completely still. Dr. Harrison checked his pulse, their face grim. "He's alive, but barely. We need to get him to the clinic." As they prepared to move him, Mrs. Henley, who lived closest to the forest edge, stood up suddenly. "The deer," she said, her voice shaking. "There are white deer at the tree line, dozens of them, just standing there watching the town." Several others rushed to the windows. I followed, my heart pounding. They were right. In broad daylight, a time when the white deer never appeared, a line of them stood perfectly still at the edge of the distant woods, their unnaturally pale forms clearly visible even from this distance. "They've never come out in daylight," Mr. Finley whispered beside me. "Not in all my 70 years. From outside came another sound, a low, rhythmic humming that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath our feet. Several car alarms went off simultaneously along Main Street. Robert returned to the front of the room, his expression grave. "What we feared has happened. Mr. Peterson's actions have awakened something that usually stays dormant. The boundaries that protect our town have been weakened." The room erupted in frightened questions, but Robert raised his hands for silence. "We've dealt with this before. Not in my lifetime or yours, but our ancestors recorded what to do." He nodded toward me. "Emily has the old protection rituals her grandmother preserved. We'll start implementing them immediately." I felt dozens of eyes turn toward me, and my throat went dry. The responsibility felt overwhelming. I had studied my grandmother's books, yes, but I'd never had to use the strongest protections, never faced a threat this direct. "The rituals will work," I said, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "But everyone needs to follow the instructions exactly." As Robert began organizing teams to secure the town perimeter, I couldn't shake the guilt gnawing at me. If I'd stopped David somehow, physically prevented him from going to the woods, none of this would be happening. Our town wouldn't be in danger. Robert seemed to read my thoughts. He paused beside me, speaking quietly. "This isn't your fault, Emily. People make their own choices. What matters now is containing the situation." I nodded, grateful for his words, even if I couldn't fully believe them. The meeting continued with assignments and preparations, the town shifting into the well-rehearsed emergency procedures passed down through generations. I was explaining the protection ritual to a group of volunteers when the community center doors burst open. Sarah Bennett stumbled in, her face streaked with tears, her coat hastily thrown over pajamas. Her wild eyes searched the room until she spotted Robert. "Tommy's gone," she cried out, her voice breaking. "My son is gone." Robert rushed to her side, guiding her to a chair as she collapsed into it. "When did you last see him, Sarah?" "This morning before all this started," she gasped between sobs. "He was playing in the yard. I went inside to answer the phone, just for a minute. When I came back out, he was gone." "Did you search the house? The neighborhood?" Robert asked. Sarah nodded frantically. "Everywhere." Then Mrs. Cooper said she saw him walking toward the old trail. the one that leads to the woods." Her voice dropped to a whisper. He told her he heard his grandmother calling him. "Robert, my mother died 3 years ago." My blood ran cold. Rule number 2, ignore voices calling your name from the trees. But how could an 8-year-old boy be expected to ignore what sounded like his beloved grandmother? "How long ago was this?" I asked, dreading the answer. Sarah looked at her watch. "Almost 30 minutes now." Robert and I exchanged glances. We knew what this meant. Children were especially vulnerable to the woods' influence. If Tommy had heard voices calling him and gone toward the trees, we had very little time. "We need a search party," Robert announced to the room. "Volunteers only. This is high risk." Hands went up immediately around the room. These were people who had lived with the threat of the woods their entire lives. People who understood what was at stake when a child was involved. "We have less than an hour," I said, the knowledge heavy in my chest. After that, I didn't need to finish. Everyone knew what happened after an hour. The child wouldn't be coming back, at least not as themselves. Robert quickly organized a 6-person team, including himself and me. As we gathered the necessary equipment, blessed silver, protective amulets, iron tools, I found myself staring out the window at the white deer still lined up at the forest edge. They were waiting for us, waiting for Tommy, and we were running out of time. The 6 of us gathered outside the community center, checking our equipment one last time before heading toward the woods. Robert had selected his most experienced deputies, along with me and 2 longtime residents who'd participated in search efforts before. Each of us carried iron tools, blessed silver items, and salt pouches, the traditional protections against whatever lived between the trees. "Everyone clear on the emergency protocols?" Robert asked, loading silver bullets into his revolver. The group nodded solemnly. Though we'd never had to use these measures in my lifetime, every Pine Harbor resident learned them as children. The irony wasn't lost on me. We were about to deliberately break the first rule to save a child who had broken the second. Sarah stood at the community center door, clutching a photo of Tommy to her chest. Her eyes were red and swollen, her body trembling with fear. I walked over to her while the others finished their preparations. "We'll find him," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. She grabbed my hand, squeezing it painfully tight. "Please bring him back, Emily. He's all I have. I promise we'll do everything possible." I couldn't offer more than that. We all knew the odds decreased with every passing minute. Robert approached us, his weathered face set in determined lines. "Sarah, we need to know exactly what Tommy was wearing this morning." Blue dinosaur t-shirt, jeans, and his light-up sneakers, the ones with red stripes. Her voice cracked. "And his green jacket, the puffy one with the hood." Robert nodded. "That helps. Now stay here with Mayor Thompson. We'll radio back as soon as we find anything." I joined the others as we headed toward our vehicles. The white deer were still visible at the tree line, standing perfectly still, watching. Their presence in daylight violated everything we knew about their habits. It was another bad sign in a morning full of them. "We drive to the north access point," Robert instructed as we climbed into 2 trucks. "That's closest to the trail Mrs. Cooper mentioned." I rode with Robert and Deputy Clark in the lead vehicle, staring out the window as we passed familiar streets now eerily empty. The town had gone into lockdown mode, curtains drawn, doors locked, protection rituals already in progress behind those closed doors. "Breaking the rules to save someone who broke the rules," Deputy Clark muttered. "Never thought I'd see the day." "We're not breaking them carelessly," Robert replied, his eyes fixed on the road. "We're following the emergency protocols. There's a difference." I stayed silent, remembering my grandmother's words when she taught me those protocols years ago. The rules keep us safe, but when a child is taken, Sometimes we must step into danger to bring them back. Those are the hardest choices we make. We reached the north access point at exactly 11 in the morning. The clearing that served as a parking area stood empty except for a few fallen leaves dancing across the gravel. Beyond it, the trail disappeared into trees that looked ordinary enough from a distance. But we knew better. "Stay together," Robert reminded us as we gathered our equipment. "No one separates for any reason. Form the diamond pattern and maintain it. Emily has the ritual words if we need them." I checked my pocket where I'd placed a small leather-bound book containing the protection rituals my grandmother had transcribed from her own grandmother's teachings. The paper felt warm against my fingers, almost alive with the power of generations who had faced these woods before us. We arranged ourselves in the diamond formation, Robert at point, me second, the others creating a protective shape with clear sight lines between us. With a final nod from our sheriff, we crossed the invisible boundary and entered the woods. The temperature dropped immediately, despite the mid-morning sun that should have warmed the autumn air. Our breath formed small clouds in front of our faces, and the sounds of the normal world, distant cars, bird calls, the hum of civilization, faded into silence. "Tommy!" Robert called out, his voice strangely muffled as if the trees absorbed the sound. "Tommy Bennett!" We moved forward carefully, staying in formation, eyes scanning the ground for tracks while avoiding looking directly at anything that moved between the trees. And things were moving. Pale shapes glimpsed only in peripheral vision, slipping from trunk to trunk, watching us. "Focus on the trail," Robert reminded us. "Nothing else matters but finding the boy." About 5 minutes in, I spotted them. Small footprints in the soft earth, the distinctive pattern of light-up sneakers with their characteristic rectangular treads. "Here," I called softly, pointing. Tommy came this way. The prints headed deeper into the woods, away from the established trail and toward areas few Pine Harbor residents would ever venture. Robert knelt to examine them. "Recent," he confirmed. "No more than an hour old." We adjusted our course to follow the footprints, maintaining our diamond formation even as the path narrowed. The white deer began appearing more frequently now, standing motionless between distant trees. I kept my eyes down, focusing only on Tommy's tracks and the few feet of forest floor ahead of me. Then the voices started. "Emily." The sound came from somewhere to my left, a perfect imitation of my grandmother's voice. "Emily, I need your help over here." I ignored it completely, just as we'd all been taught. The others heard their own names too. I could tell by the tension in their shoulders, the way their steps briefly faltered before continuing forward. "Deputy Williams, your daughter is hurt," came a child's voice from the right. "Don't engage," Robert reminded us without turning. "Whatever you hear, it's not real." The footprints led us to a small stream that cut through the forest floor. Here, Tommy's trail became confused. The prints circled the area multiple times before heading north, parallel to the water. "He was disoriented," I said quietly. "Or something was leading him in circles." "Listen," Deputy Clark whispered. We all fell silent. At first I heard nothing but the gentle gurgle of the stream. Then it came, the faint sound of a child crying somewhere ahead of us. "Tommy?" Robert called, his voice tight with controlled urgency. The crying stopped immediately, replaced by a soft giggle that raised the hair on my arms. "That's not right," Mr. Finley muttered, one of the volunteers who'd joined us. "That doesn't sound like a child." "Stay in formation," Robert ordered as we pressed forward, following both the footprints and the intermittent sounds of crying that started and stopped in unnatural patterns. The trees grew thicker here, older, their branches creating a canopy that blocked much of the daylight. Shadows stretched longer than they should have at midday, and the air filled with a musty scent like old leaves and stagnant water. I kept my eyes on the forest floor, tracking Tommy's prints while mentally reciting my grandmother's protection words. The white deer moved closer, always at the edges of our vision, never directly in front of us. I counted 12 of them now, forming their own perimeter around our group. "Hello, friends," a voice called from ahead. "I've been waiting for you." I knew that voice, though it sounded wrong, flatter somehow, with strange pauses between words. Looking up cautiously, I saw David Peterson standing about 20 yards ahead on the path. But this wasn't the David I'd brought back from the woods earlier. His face had changed. The smile that had seemed unnatural before was now physically impossible. The corners of his mouth extended too far, carved into his cheeks like a Halloween pumpkin. The cuts looked raw and recent, thin trickles of blood still visible on his skin. His eyes remained completely black, reflecting nothing. "David," Robert said evenly, keeping his revolver at his side but ready. "Where's Tommy Bennett?" David's carved smile widened impossibly further. He's seeing the truth now, the beauty I discovered. He moved toward us with that same wrong fluidity I'd noticed earlier. "You should all see it too. The pale ones want to welcome you." "Stay back," Robert warned, raising his weapon. "We're here for the boy, nothing else." David stopped, cocking his head at that same uncomfortable angle. "But they're curious about you, Sheriff, about all of you, especially Emily." He turned those black eyes toward me. "They remember your family, your grandfather, your cousin Mark." I forced myself to look only at his chest, not his face or the trees around him. "Where's Tommy?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. David laughed, a hollow sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Following his grandmother. She's showing him things no living person has seen." He gestured behind him. "I can take you to him, all of you. There's room for everyone among the pale ones." "He's trying to separate us," Robert murmured. "Stay in formation." We began moving forward again, giving David a wide berth. He pivoted unnaturally to watch us pass, that carved smile never changing. "You're going the right way," he called after us. "Just remember to look up when you find him. It's beautiful in the canopy. That's where they like to wait." I shivered but kept moving, focusing on Tommy's tracks, which had become more direct now, as if he'd found something specific to follow. David fell in behind our group, maintaining a distance of about 10 yards. I could feel him watching us, hear his footsteps that never quite matched the rhythm a human walk should make. "They whisper such wonderful secrets," he said conversationally, as if we were all out for a pleasant nature walk. "About what they are, where they came from, what they want." "Ignore him," Robert instructed, though the tension in his voice betrayed his own unease. We pressed deeper into the woods, the light growing dimmer despite the midday hour. Tommy's tracks remained clear. Too clear, I realized, as if he wanted to be followed, or something wanted us to follow. A clearing appeared ahead, perfectly circular in a way natural forest openings rarely are. The tracks led directly to its center. As we approached the edge, I saw him. Tommy Bennett stood perfectly still in the middle of the clearing, his small frame rigid, head tilted back to stare at something high in the tree canopy. His green jacket was smudged with dirt, but he appeared physically unharmed. "Tommy," I called softly, fighting the urge to run to him. The rules of formation protected us all. The boy didn't respond, didn't move a muscle. He remained transfixed by whatever he saw above. Robert signaled for us to maintain position as we cautiously entered the clearing, keeping our formation intact. The white deer had completely surrounded the open space now, still and silent among the trees. "Tommy Bennett," Robert called, his voice firm but gentle. "Your mother sent us to bring you home." Slowly, terribly, the boy began to turn. His movements had that same wrong fluidity I'd seen in David, too smooth, too controlled for a child. When he faced us, my heart sank. His expression was blank, empty in exactly the same way David's had been when I found him. But worse, the corners of his mouth had begun to stretch, just slightly, the first hints of that carved smile forming on his 8-year-old face. "He hears his grandmother," David said from the edge of the clearing. "She's telling him the most wonderful stories up there." He pointed toward the canopy. "You should all look, just for a moment. Then you'll understand." "Don't look up," I warned the others, keeping my eyes fixed firmly on Tommy. "Whatever happens, don't look up." I stepped forward carefully, maintaining my position in our protective formation, but trying to get closer to the boy. "Tommy, we need to take you back to your mom. She's very worried about you." Tommy's head tilted at an unnatural angle, his eyes unfocused. "Grandma wants me to stay," he said in a flat voice. "She says I can live in the trees with her now." "That's not your grandmother, Tommy," I said gently. "Your real grandmother loved you very much, but she's gone now. Whatever you're hearing isn't her." A cold wind swept through the clearing, causing the trees around us to sway and creak. The white deer stepped closer, no longer content to wait at the perimeter. "They're getting impatient," David said, his carved smile stretching wider. "They've been patient for so long, waiting for the rules to be broken, waiting for someone to invite them in. And now the child has done it." Robert raised his revolver, aiming it skyward. "Nobody move," he ordered. "Emily, begin the protection ritual." I pulled the small book from my pocket, my fingers finding the marked page by memory. The words were written in an old dialect, passed down through generations, their meaning less important than their sound and the intent behind them. As I began to recite the first lines, Tommy's body went rigid. His eyes widened, and the unnatural smile growing on his face faltered. "No!" David shouted, suddenly animated. "Don't listen to her. Look up. All of you need to look up now." I continued the ritual, the ancient words feeling strange yet familiar on my tongue. A heaviness pressed down from above, as if something massive and invisible pushed against the air itself. Tommy began to tremble, his small body shaking violently. Tears filled his eyes, real, human tears that cut through whatever influence had taken hold of him. "It hurts," he whimpered, sounding like himself again for the first time. "The voices are too loud." I wanted desperately to run to him, to pull him into my arms and carry him away from this place. But breaking formation now would endanger everyone. The ritual had to be completed first. David moved into the clearing, his movements jerky and frustrated. "Stop her!" he shouted at the sky. "They need to see you. They need to understand." The air grew colder, thick with a pressure that made breathing difficult. The white deer began to move, circling the clearing with increasing speed. "Almost there." Robert encouraged me as I continued reciting, my voice growing stronger with each line. Tommy fell to his knees, his hands pressed against his ears. "Make them stop," he cried. "I want my mom." As I spoke the final words of the protection ritual, Robert fired a silver bullet into the air above the clearing. The sound was impossibly loud, shattering the unnatural silence of the woods. The effect was immediate. The white deer froze, then scattered in all directions. The pressure lifted, and the clearing brightened as if a dark cloud had passed from in front of the sun. David screamed, a sound of pure rage that contained nothing human. His body convulsed, the carved smile cracking at the edges, fresh blood trailing down his cheeks. "Now!" Robert shouted. "Get the boy!" I broke formation and ran to Tommy, who collapsed into my arms, sobbing against my shoulder. His body felt ice cold, but the blank expression had left his face, and the unnatural smile had receded, leaving only the normal face of a frightened child. "I got you," I whispered, lifting him easily. He was so small, so vulnerable. "We're taking you home." Robert and the others reformed around us, creating a protective circle with Tommy and me at the center. David had fallen to his knees at the edge of the clearing, still screaming that terrible scream as black fluid leaked from his eyes. "Move out," Robert ordered. "Same way we came in. Don't stop for anything." We backed out of the clearing, keeping our eyes away from both the canopy and David's convulsing form. Tommy clung to me, his face buried against my neck, small body trembling. "Don't let go of me," he whispered. "I won't," I promised, holding him tighter as we retreated through the trees. The way back seemed shorter somehow, as if the woods themselves were eager to expel us now that we'd reclaimed what had been taken. The white deer were gone, the unnatural cold lifting with each step toward the boundary. Behind us, David's screams faded and transformed into something else, a series of clicks and high-pitched sounds no human throat should make. None of us looked back. We maintained our formation all the way to the tree line, emerging into ordinary daylight that suddenly seemed the most precious thing in the world. The trucks waited where we'd left them, normal and solid and real. Only when we reached the vehicles did I finally look down at Tommy's face. His eyes were closed, his breathing steady. He had fallen unconscious in my arms, his small body finally surrendering to exhaustion now that he was safe. "Is he?" Robert asked, holstering his weapon. "He's alive," I said, checking the boy's pulse. "Just unconscious. We need to get him to Dr. Harrison right away." As the others loaded into the vehicles, I held Tommy on my lap in the back seat of Robert's truck, supporting his head carefully. His skin had begun to warm, the normal color returning to his face. "What about David?" Deputy Clark asked as we pulled away. Robert's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. "We'll send a team back for him later, if he's still there." We all understood what he meant. Whatever had been using David's body might abandon it now that its plan had failed, or it might take him deeper into the woods where we wouldn't find him again. Either way, Tommy was our priority. As we drove back toward town, Tommy stirred in my arms, his eyes fluttering open for just a moment. "The pale people," he murmured, half asleep. "They wanted me to stay with them forever." "You're safe now," I told him, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "We're taking you home to your mom." He nodded slightly before slipping back into unconsciousness, his small hand gripping my jacket as if afraid I might disappear. Looking out the window at the normal world passing by, houses, telephone poles, mailboxes, I felt the weight of what had just happened settle over me. We had saved Tommy, yes, but at what cost? The rules had been broken, the boundaries weakened, and whatever lived in those woods had revealed itself more directly than it had in generations. Robert caught my eye again in the mirror. "You did good back there, Emily. That ritual saved him." I nodded, thinking of my grandmother and all she had taught me. "The pale ones aren't finished," I said quietly, making sure Tommy couldn't hear. "Today was just the beginning." "I know," Robert replied grimly. "But for now, we got the boy back. That's what matters." I held Tommy closer as we drove through the silent streets of Pine Harbor, wondering what would come next for our town, and for the child who had seen things no 8-year-old should ever have to see. I held Tommy close to my chest, his small body trembling against mine. His eyes were beginning to flutter open, consciousness returning at the worst possible moment. My instincts took over. I immediately pressed his face against my shoulder, shielding his eyes. "Don't look, Tommy," I whispered. "Keep your eyes closed no matter what." Robert signaled to the others, and they moved swiftly to form a protective circle around us. Deputy Clark stood at my back while Mr. Finley and the others positioned themselves at equal distances, creating a human barrier between us and the threats lurking in the woods. "We need to move," Robert said, his voice tight with urgency. Before we could take a step, David's figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. He moved with that terrible fluid grace, each step too smooth, too measured to be human. The carved smile on his face had widened since I'd last looked, stretching impossibly far across his cheeks. Fresh blood trickled from the corners. bright red against his pale skin. "You can't leave yet," David said, his voice carrying an unnatural echo. "They want to welcome you properly. All of you." He gestured upward with a jerky motion. "Just look up. See their beauty. Understand what waits for everyone in Pine Harbor." Tommy whimpered against my shoulder, his small fingers digging into my jacket. "I won't let anything hurt you," I promised him softly. David took another step forward. Robert raised his revolver in warning. "The pale ones don't fear your silver, Sheriff." David laughed, the sound wrong and hollow. "They've been here longer than your bullets, longer than your town, longer than your rules." I adjusted my hold on Tommy, keeping one hand firmly over his eyes. The small leather-bound book of protection rituals felt heavy in my pocket. My grandmother's voice seemed to echo in my mind. When all else fails, the words remain. The words have power they cannot take. I began to recite the protection ritual, not the simple version we'd used earlier, but the complete verses my grandmother had insisted I memorize despite their complexity. Ancient words passed down through generations of Pine Harbor women, spoken in a dialect that predated the town itself. "Whose voice is that?" Tommy whispered against my neck. "It sounds like singing." "Just focus on my voice," I told him between verses. "Nothing else matters." As the words flowed, the air around us changed. It grew dense and frigid, pressing against us from all sides. Dark shadows moved between the trees, not the natural shifting of light and branches, but purposeful movements circling our group like predators. David's carved smile twisted in frustration. "Stop her!" he shouted toward the canopy. "She's using the old words." Something invisible pushed against my mind, a pressure that made my thoughts fuzzy and sluggish. An overwhelming urge to look up at the tree canopy swept through me. My neck muscles tensed, trying to tilt my head back against my will. "Don't look up," Robert reminded us all, his voice cutting through the mental fog. "Nobody looks up, no matter what you hear or feel." The pressure intensified. I stumbled slightly but kept reciting, the ancient words rolling off my tongue with increasing power. Tommy felt heavier in my arms, as if something were trying to pull him away from me. David stepped closer, his movements now jerky and agitated. "They're waiting for you. They want to show you everything they showed me." He pointed upward again. "The truth is just above you. All you have to do is look." Robert aimed his revolver skyward and fired a blessed silver bullet into the canopy. The sound cracked through the clearing like thunder, and the whispers that had been building around us transformed instantly into high-pitched shrieks of rage. The shadows between the trees writhed violently. "You've angered them," David hissed, his voice suddenly less human than before. "Now they'll take you all." I continued the ritual, my voice growing stronger with each phrase. Tommy pressed closer against me, his body shaking with fear. David's body began to convulse. He jerked and twitched, his head snapping back at an impossible angle. The carved smile on his face cracked at the edges, fresh blood streaming down his cheeks as his skin split further. "We need to move now," Robert ordered. "Maintain formation. Emily, keep the boy covered and keep reciting." We began to back away from the clearing, step by careful step. I kept my eyes firmly on Tommy's face, refusing to look at anything else. His eyes were squeezed shut, tears leaking from beneath his lashes. "Is that my grandma talking?" Tommy asked in a small voice. I can hear her again. "It's not your grandma," I told him firmly. "Don't listen to anything but my voice." The invisible pressure against my mind grew stronger as we retreated. I felt phantom hands plucking at my clothes, trying to slow my steps, trying to turn my body back toward the clearing. The air filled with whispers promising secrets, knowledge, reunion with lost loved ones. If only we would look up. If only we would stay. I recited louder, drowning out the whispers with my grandmother's words. As we neared the edge of the clearing, they finally showed themselves. Pale figures stepped out from behind the trees, translucent beings with elongated limbs and hollow eyes that seemed to pull light into them rather than reflect it. Their movements were fluid yet wrong, like watching water flow uphill. They reached toward us with arms that stretched too far, fingers too long and jointed in too many places. Robert fired again, the silver bullets cutting through the air. Where they passed near the pale figures, the creatures scattered like mist, their forms temporarily disrupted before beginning to reform. "I'm almost out," Robert warned, checking his revolver. 2 bullets left. David dropped to his knees at the center of the clearing, his body contorting as he screamed, a sound that started human but quickly shifted to something else. A series of clicks and high-pitched tones no human throat should make. "They're leaving him," Deputy Clark murmured. "Whatever was using him is giving up." The pale figures moved closer, gliding between trees with increasing speed. They never crossed directly into our path but flanked us on all sides, hurting us, testing the edges of our formation. "Stay together," Robert ordered as one of the beings reached for Mr. Finley, who barely jerked away in time. I kept reciting, kept holding Tommy, kept moving backward toward what I hoped was the direction of town. The protection ritual was working. I could feel it creating a barrier around us that the pale ones couldn't fully penetrate. But my voice was growing hoarse, and the words were becoming harder to remember as exhaustion set in. Behind us, David's body collapsed completely, sprawling across the forest floor as the entity abandoned its host. His final human scream echoed through the trees, followed by silence. The pale figures surged forward at once, their forms coalescing into a wall of translucent white. Robert fired his last 2 bullets, scattering them just enough to create an opening. "Run!" he shouted. "Straight for the tree line! Don't stop! Don't look back!" Our careful formation dissolved as we sprinted through the momentary gap. I clutched Tommy tightly against my chest, my legs pumping beneath me as I ran faster than I thought possible while carrying a child. His face remained buried against my neck, his eyes still firmly closed. Cold fingers brushed against my back, sending ice through my veins. I didn't look. I kept running, kept reciting what I could remember of the ritual between gasping breaths. The trees thinned, sunlight breaking through more frequently. The pressure in my mind began to ease, the whispers fading. Behind us I heard movements, rapid, unnatural sounds of pursuit, but they grew fainter with each yard we covered. We burst through the tree line into blessed ordinary daylight. I didn't stop. None of us stopped. We ran across the parking area to the trucks, scrambling inside as Robert started the engine. "Town Square," he ordered, slamming the vehicle into drive. "Direct route. No stops." I cradled Tommy in the back seat, finally allowing myself to look down at his face. He was unconscious again, his features peaceful in a way that suggested simple exhaustion rather than supernatural influence. The unnatural beginnings of a carved smile had completely faded from his face. As we sped down the road toward town, I checked repeatedly over my shoulder, half expecting to see pale figures emerging from the tree line. But the forest remained still, at least to ordinary sight. "Did we lose David?" Deputy Clark asked from the front passenger seat. "He was already lost," Robert answered grimly. "Whatever we brought back this morning wasn't him anymore. Not really." I nodded, remembering the moment in the clearing when David's body had collapsed. The entity abandoned him. I don't know if there's anything left. We drove through the deserted streets of Pine Harbor, residents peering nervously from behind curtained windows as our vehicles passed. No one had ventured outside despite the daytime hour. They sensed the danger, even from a distance. Robert pulled up to the town square, stopping directly in front of the community center where anxious faces pressed against the windows. Tommy remained unconscious in my arms, his breathing steady but his skin still too cool to the touch. The community center doors burst open and Sarah Bennett ran toward us, her face streaked with tears. As she reached for her son, I carefully transferred his small form into her waiting arms. "Is he okay?" she asked, her voice breaking as she clutched him close. "He's alive," I told her. "We got to him in time." As the others gathered around us in the town square, I looked back toward the distant line of trees visible on the horizon. For a moment, I thought I saw pale shapes moving at the edge of the forest, watching us, waiting. But when I blinked, they were gone, leaving me to wonder if they had ever truly been there at all. Dr. Harrison's hands moved methodically over Tommy's small body as Robert and I watched from the doorway of the examination room. The boy remained unconscious, his breathing steady, but his skin still cooler than it should have been. Sarah hovered at the bedside, her fingers intertwined with her son's limp hand, eyes never leaving his face. "Physically, there's nothing wrong with him," Dr. Harrison said, setting down their stethoscope. "No injuries, no signs of trauma. His temperature is slightly below normal, but not dangerously so." "But why isn't he waking up?" Sarah's voice cracked with fear. Dr. Harrison adjusted Tommy's blanket with gentle hands. The mind protects itself, especially in children. Whatever he experienced in those woods. They paused, looking at me with knowing eyes. His brain is giving itself time to process, or perhaps to forget. I stood awkwardly in the doorway, still dusty and disheveled from our rescue mission. The memory of the pale figures reaching for us with their 2 long fingers made me shiver despite the clinic's warmth. I wanted nothing more than to go home, shower, and try to forget what I'd seen. But I couldn't leave. Not until I knew Tommy would be okay. "You should get some rest," Robert told me quietly. "You've done enough today." I shook my head. "I want to stay until he wakes up." Robert didn't argue. He understood what it meant to feel responsible in Pine Harbor. "I need to organize a team to look for David," he said instead. "Call me the minute anything changes." After he left, I took a seat in the hard plastic chair next to Sarah. She barely seemed to notice me, her entire being focused on her son. The examination room fell into silence, broken only by the steady beep of the heart monitor Dr. Harrison had attached, just as a precaution. "He's going to be okay," I said after several minutes, not sure if I was reassuring Sarah or myself. She turned to me then, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "What happened out there? What did those things want with my son?" I hesitated, unsure how much to share. The pale ones were something we acknowledged without discussing in detail, a threat we prepared for without naming. But Sarah deserved to know what had nearly taken her child. "They're drawn to innocence," I explained, keeping my voice low though we were alone in the room. "Children can hear them more easily because they haven't learned not to listen yet. They called to Tommy using your mother's voice because they knew he would follow." "But why? What do they want?" I looked at Tommy's peaceful face. "To add to their numbers, to grow stronger. They've been in those woods since before Pine Harbor existed, waiting for us to forget the rules, to stop believing." Sarah's hand tightened around her son's. "And the ritual you performed, the one Robert said saved him? My grandmother taught it to me. Her grandmother taught her, and so on, back through generations of Pine Harbor women. The words create a barrier the pale ones can't cross, at least not easily." "Thank you," Sarah whispered, reaching for my hand with her free one. "If you hadn't been there..." I squeezed her fingers. But I was. We all were. The clinic settled into afternoon quietness around us. Dr. Harrison checked in periodically, but mostly left us alone with Tommy. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke to Robert's hand on my shoulder, his face grim in the fading daylight. "We found David," he said. I blinked sleep from my eyes. Where? At the edge of the woods, just sitting there staring at nothing. The carved smile is gone, but he shook his head. There's nothing left of him in there, Emily. Whatever was using him is gone, and it took everything that made him David with it. I thought of the confident journalist who'd sat at my counter just 2 days ago, so certain he could prove the supernatural didn't exist. What will happen to him? Dr. Harrison sedated him for now. We'll transfer him to the psychiatric facility in Grand Rapids tomorrow. His editor has been notified. The irony was bitter. David had come looking for a story about small-town superstitions, and now he would spend the rest of his life institutionalized, his mind shattered by the very things he'd sought to debunk. His editor will probably think he had some kind of breakdown, I said, that he got lost in the woods and his mind couldn't handle it. Robert nodded. Better that way. No one would believe the truth. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the clinic windows, Tommy finally stirred. His eyelids fluttered, then opened. He looked confused, blinking up at the ceiling tiles. "Mom?" His voice was small but clear. Sarah leaned forward with a strangled sob. "I'm here, baby. You're safe now." Tommy looked around the room, his gaze passing over me without recognition. "Why am I in the doctor's office? Did I get sick?" Sarah and I exchanged glances. "You don't remember what happened?" she asked gently. Tommy's forehead wrinkled in concentration. "I was playing in the yard, and then..." He shook his head. "I don't know. My head feels fuzzy." Dr. Harrison entered at that moment, summoned by the change in Tommy's heart monitor. After a quick examination, they pronounced him remarkably recovered and suggested he could go home after a light meal and some observation. "He really doesn't remember anything?" I asked Dr. Harrison quietly, while Sarah helped Tommy sit up and drink some water. "It's not uncommon with traumatic experiences," they explained, "especially in children. The mind protects itself by burying what it can't process. It might come back in fragments or dreams, or it might stay buried forever." I wasn't sure which would be better for Tommy, to remember and understand the danger, or to live in blissful ignorance of how close he'd come to being lost forever. While Sarah helped Tommy eat some soup the clinic nurse had brought, I stepped outside to call Robert. The evening air felt impossibly normal after everything that had happened. Streetlights flickered on along Main Street, and I could see people heading toward the community center for the meeting Robert had called. "He's awake," I told Robert when he answered. "He doesn't remember anything about the woods." "Small mercies," Robert replied. "Meeting starts in 30 minutes. We need you there, Emily. Your grandmother's knowledge is more important than ever now." I promised to come after making sure Tommy and Sarah got home safely. When I returned to the room, Tommy was sitting up in bed, looking much more like himself. The color had returned to his cheeks, and he was chattering to his mother about wanting ice cream when they got home. "The nice lady helped find me?" he asked when Sarah explained why I was there. "Yes, Emily and Sheriff Robert and some others. You were..." Sarah hesitated. "You were lost, and they brought you back." Tommy looked at me with the direct, uncomplicated gaze of childhood. "Thank you for finding me." I smiled, fighting back unexpected tears. "You're welcome, Tommy." Sarah thanked me at least a dozen times as I helped them to her car. Each expression of gratitude made me more uncomfortable. I hadn't done anything special, just followed the rituals my grandmother had taught me, carried the knowledge she'd insisted I learn even when I'd rolled my eyes as a teenager. "I mean it, Emily," Sarah said as she buckled Tommy into the back seat. "I can never repay you for bringing him back." I shook my head. There's nothing to repay. Anyone in town would have done the same. But that wasn't entirely true. Not everyone knew the rituals or could recite them under pressure. Not everyone had been raised by a grandmother who took the old ways seriously, who had lived through previous encounters with the Pale Ones and understood what was at stake. I watched their car pull away, then turned toward the community center. The parking lot was full. It seemed the entire adult population of Pine Harbor had turned out for the meeting. Inside, the mood was somber. Conversations hushed as I entered, and several people approached to ask about Tommy. "He's going to be fine," I assured them. "He's home with his mother now." Robert stood at the front of the room, looking more tired than I'd ever seen him. The events of the past 2 days had aged him visibly. He nodded at my arrival and called the meeting to order. "As most of you know, we had a serious breach of our protective boundaries yesterday," he began. "An outsider deliberately broke all 5 rules, and then this morning, young Tommy Bennett was lured into the woods." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Many had participated in reinforcing the town's protections after David's encounter with the Pale Ones, but few knew the details of Tommy's rescue. "Thanks to quick action and Emily Crawford's knowledge of the old rituals, we were able to bring Tommy back safely," Robert continued. "But this incident makes clear that our current approaches to protecting our community are insufficient." Mayor Thompson stepped forward. "What are you suggesting, Sheriff?" "2 things. First, we need to strengthen our defenses. The salt lines, iron nails, and other physical protections need to be maintained more diligently. Second," he looked directly at me, "we need a better way to handle outsiders." I understood immediately what he meant. If I had found a way to make David Peterson take our warnings seriously, none of this would have happened. Tommy wouldn't have been in danger. The Pale Ones wouldn't have been awakened. "Emily," Robert said, "would you be willing to share what you know, to help us create a more comprehensive guide to our protections?" All eyes turned to me. I felt the weight of their expectations, their fear, their hope. My grandmother had passed her knowledge to me because I was her only living female descendant, the only one who could carry on the tradition. But maybe that approach was too limited. Maybe the knowledge needed to be more widely shared if we were to keep our community safe. "I think we need more than just stronger defenses," I said, standing up. "We need a way to make visitors understand the importance of our rules without dismissing them as superstition. Something written down, something official-looking that explains the dangers without revealing too much." Robert nodded encouragingly. "What do you have in mind?" "A visitor's guide," I suggested. "Something we could give to anyone staying in town, at the motel, at my family's bed and breakfast. Something that presents our rules as local ordinances, with consequences for breaking them that sound official and serious." Mayor Thompson looked skeptical. "You think a pamphlet would have stopped someone like David Peterson?" "Maybe not," I admitted, "but it would give us documentation to point to. It would make our warnings seem less like folklore and more like law." The discussion continued for over an hour. Plans were made, committees formed. Mrs. Henley would coordinate the reinforcement of physical protections. Mr. Finley would work with the town council to draft official-sounding language for the visitor's guide. And I would document the protection rituals. Not all the details, but enough that more people could perform them if needed. As the meeting wound down, Robert pulled me aside to share what he'd learned about David's condition. "The psychiatric team says he's in a dissociative state," he explained. "He doesn't speak or respond to questions. The only thing he does is draw. The same image over and over." "Let me guess," I said. "Pale figures in the trees." Robert nodded grimly. "The transfer to Grand Rapids is scheduled for tomorrow morning. The official diagnosis will be acute psychosis triggered by environmental factors, getting lost in the woods, exposure, that sort of thing." "And his editor, the article he was writing?" "The editor was told David suffered some kind of breakdown. He seemed more concerned about the deadline than about David himself." Robert's expression hardened. "People like that, they're part of the problem. They push and push for a story without caring about the consequences." I thought about the visitor's guide I'd volunteered to help create. We can't stop people from coming here, Robert, but maybe we can make them listen before it's too late. Later that night, after returning to my quiet cottage, I sat at my grandmother's old desk and opened her journal. The pages were filled with her neat handwriting, rituals, warnings, accounts of previous encounters with the Pale Ones, knowledge passed down through generations of women in our family. I took out a fresh notebook and began to write. Not everything. Some secrets had to remain within our bloodline, but enough to help others protect themselves and our town. A guide that balanced truth with safety, wisdom with practicality. As I wrote, I realized my grandmother had been preparing me for this moment all along. She had known someday I would need to adapt our traditions for changing times, to find new ways to preserve ancient knowledge. Outside my window, the woods were visible as a dark line against the night sky. I knew the Pale Ones were watching, waiting. They had been patient for generations. They would be patient still. But now, at least, we would be better prepared. I wrote until my hand cramped, documenting what I knew while my memories of the day's events were still fresh. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, helping Tommy and Sarah heal, dealing with the aftermath of David's possession, reinforcing our town's protections. But for tonight, I had taken the first step toward a new approach to our ancient problem. Knowledge was power, my grandmother always said, and knowledge shared wisely could be the strongest protection of all.